Well, good afternoon on the West Coast, Mountain Time, Central Time, and I would even say as far as Eastern Time in the U.S. Good evening over in Europe, and good early morning over in Asia and to all the ships at sea. This is Harry Brelsford, SMB Nation. We are back for the 5th lecture of winter quarter. So just to level set, we have a quarterly lecture series called MSP Tech Talk. The talks are typically academic in nature, and this is the 5th installment. And today we have an expert and present company included, and we're going to answer questions on Azure and Office 365. I do want to say up front, the flow of today will be as good as the audience makes it. It's one of those days where we want to kind of have that interaction of unconference, and we have a couple tricks up our sleeve. A little bit later on, we'll be hearing from a group in Portland. The Portland Technology Wizards are live on the line and streaming and in a room for their monthly meetings, so they'll be participating. That's kind of cool. For the rest of you, if you could use the questions feature on your dashboard for GoToWebinar to ask your questions, and I'll be asking them of our expert Bhargav, and we'll jump right into him in a moment. As you know, this academic series is made possible by the generous underwriting of our community sponsors today. That's Fortinet and Synnex. We're going to have some conversations with Fortinet and Synnex a little bit later. And then when we have a video come up, you will need to use your computer speakers for the video. It will not work on telephone-based connections. And then check the handout section over on the dashboard for handouts related to today. And once again, use the questions feature to ask all your questions. Bhargav, welcome, sir. Let's jump into it. I see your screen, and let's go ahead and properly introduce yourself, and then I think you have some talking points and fire starters to get this party started.
Yeah, thank you, Harry, for teeing it up. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yep.
So I come from a very heavy Microsoft and IT background. I started my career about a little over 20 years ago. Started with Novel NetWare and Microsoft's Windows 95, right? And this is all from the networking perspective. I used Windows before then, but that was all the standalone Windows and DOS usage for for anybody who loved those days of the floppies and green screens. But going from that, you know, as the time progressed and my career, so did I got involved in all kind of different projects, start small to big, where I worked on Active Directory, Exchange, Link, OCS at that time, Skype for Business afterwards, Citrix, VMware, RSA Secure ID, right? So a plethora of things, anything and everything that kind of touched IT, I got involved in, whether it was security or whether it was secure desktop delivery or whether it was identity and management with Active Directory and the backend management, right? And then, of course, at some point in time, I shifted my focus to becoming really a SME at depth for two of these many technologies. So I spent a lot of time on Exchange and Skype for Business. I became a Microsoft Certified Master in both products when that program was live. And then I also was an instructor on both of those masters rotations up until the point when Microsoft Learning stopped the Microsoft Certified Masters program. That was a sad day, I can tell you.
Hey, Bhargav, first of all, you had me at Novell NetWare. I resemble that remark in terms of starting my career. And tell us quickly, you're a published author. So I know you have a book up on Amazon for exchange. Do you have other articles and publications people might find if they search on your name?
Yes. In fact, if you just search on my name, you would land on my blog, where I have published quite a few things over years. Anything and everything that kind of sums up my experience, really, small articles talking about how to do things, to something more philosophical, where I went off the tangent talking about um, the process challenges and things like that. All the things that I touch, mostly I tend to kind of document my experiences that can help others on my blog. I do have articles also published on LinkedIn. So on my LinkedIn profile, again, if you search for me, you won't miss me. I have
Perfect.
articles that I publish there as well from time to time.
Well, sir. With that said, in fact, hold on just a second. Hey, Ken, down in Portland, if you can come on live and introduce yourself and your group, because we have a special format today, and that's always a good sound check. Ken.
Hey there. So we're from Technology Wizards in Portland. Several of us here, group of consultants focus on Microsoft products intended for small businesses, and we got a bunch of us in the room now, and we're excited to be a part of this event today. So thank you for allowing us to tag on.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to your questions. Bhargav, let's jump into the good stuff. You have a few slides as fire starters. Let's hit it head on.
Yeah, and I really have what, like you said, are the fire starters. I want this to be as much interactive as possible. I want to address your questions. That's really what the format is supposed to be, right? So let's start with the first one. And this is something I'm sure everybody has heard of: digital transformation, right? So a lot of buzz in the industry, digital transformation. I want to take a pulse of what does digital transformation mean to you, right? Anybody
Sure.
here wants to chime in? I think it kind of provides you a springboard into the deeper discussion of Office 365 and Azure and other stuff, but it's not limited to Microsoft, right? It's bigger industry term, and I really want to take a pulse of what everyone thinks of it.
Well, I'll start and then I'll call out to Portland. So that's a fair question. I think it's an overused word, and I'll give you. I mean, it's a common word, and quite unfortunately, it's overused. But that said, I'll give you an example where I think there's confusion, and so that would be when people talk about digital media and digital marketing. Now, Bhargav, my bias is I spend some time in that world, and I spend time in the world of analytics, and so clearly, digital transformation could be, EMR, medical records, and other fields afar. It's going to mean different things to different people, but I personally, I think that think of it this way, and then we'll see if we can rouse Portland. But think of it this way, that I would offer personally, we had a magazine for 6 years in conjunction with Microsoft and the small business specialist community. For a number of reasons, the magazine died in about 2012. Everybody can kind of guess some of the, economics of publishing and paper, print, et cetera. And so we have seen digital transformation, firsthand, going from a publisher, old school publisher, to a new school publisher, and the game has changed with analytics. Ken, do you want to take a stab at maybe what one or two of your people down there in Portland mean? Think about what digital transformation in your world.
I'm looking around the room and I got a bunch of blank stares.
Mine's not blank, but it's loaded.
I think you nailed it pretty well. I think it's just looking at it and moving everything in a digital way, getting rid of some of the analog methods, paper, etc., where we're doing things. Anybody
Fair
else?
enough.
I'll say it. I think it has a lot to do with data centralization, which has a high potential for digital slavery.
I want to add to that I've become my dad in the sense that I've become a slave to list, right? I'm always walking around with a notepad with a list of to-dos, and I become a slave to lists, so I hear you. Bhargav, let's give the talking stick back to you. There's, a little bit of feedback for you, my friend.
Yeah, no, and certainly a good start, right? So Harry, you mentioned a publication. You said, there was a publication, things changed. We have seen some well-known publications, newspapers, and others have over time either not fare well or completely shut down. We have seen organizations that thrive, and you mentioned analytics, right? So that's the use, I think, of technology to their advantage to survive the changing environment is really what it comes down to, right? You had old ways of doing things, you have new ways of doing things, and how you adapt to change and to benefit from what's happening. The only constant, as I like to say in general, is change. The only constant is change, right? And as things change around you, how well do you adapt to those changes? That's really what it comes down to in my mind. But let me just put it this way. When even again, I think I want to throw another question out there and ask, how many of you still have a Windows XP or Windows 7 somewhere, whether it's personal use or whether it's in some companies that you work with, you assist, or even your customers?
Yeah, and I can kind of answer that generically. And by the way, forgive us, we're not set up for dynamic polling today, but let me take a stab at it. And the answer would be that everybody has one of those machines in their client base, not necessarily their home office or office as a Microsoft partner, but everybody's got one of those machines at some client somewhere. And I'm constantly amazed. The other day, I saw Windows XP running some medical equipment at the eye doctor I go to. So say what you must, but it's still out there, my friend.
No, and what's interesting is, it confirms what you just said. It confirms not only mine, but I'm sure as an industry-wide problem, a belief of a lot of people, is that at home, like you mentioned, it is less likely that you're going to see a Windows XP or Windows 7. Why? Because your machine gets old. You go to Best Buy or some other place. If you're not tech savvy, you ask someone in your family or friends and get the newest tech. Whatever it is, usually comes with the latest operating system, right? Whether you're a Mac fan or a Windows fan, and then you get the latest hardware and software. That doesn't necessarily translate in the business world. I have a business of a dentistry, and I am a doctor. All I care about is people coming and going, and I'm cleaning their teeth, and I'm serving their needs as far as their medical attention is concerned. And what I run on my front desk to generate invoices and process the claims, does it matter if I'm running Windows XP if I don't have to spend an extra dollar? Right?
Yep.
That's what it comes down to, and this is not limited to small businesses. This I see it all the time in big businesses as well, and unfortunately, we have seen it in financial services more than we would like to. We had big incidents, very visible, articles in worldwide news where you have this organized crime where criminals are attacking your vulnerable Windows XP and Windows 7 terminals that are spewing cache, right? There are real impacts on the world. And what does that, what I'm trying to get at is that's the prime example of lack of transformation, right? And so coming back, go ahead.
Yeah, Bhargav, I have a couple of comments up in the questions feature. So Tom Harper says, digital transformation, it's in his opinion, it's redesigning business processes to eliminate middlemen and reduce friction in delivering goods or services. We have Hal Hosteder saying that he has Windows 7 or Windows XP endpoints. And then we have Michael Cabral back with us this week saying Windows XP runs on the Home Depot cash registers from what I can see. So,
right.
Well, why don't we jump in? I know there's some people chomping at the bit for 365 and Azure-isms. If you don't mind, Fring, why don't we move over to that? And I know my screen's going to fill up with comments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so this basically, so let me end this slide with saying, you're right. We got a couple of comments. They are good comments. In general, I tend to look at the transformation at something much higher level, right? Continuing to realize the value out of the technology. And I'm not saying, Windows or Office 365 or things like that, but rather the technological change that's driving all the other products and services from different vendors, including Microsoft, to make your lives better. And from the organizational perspective, it means looking outside at what your core priorities are and how you transform the customer's experience. That's really what then drives the products and services. So having said that, let's go to Office 365. And the Office 365 basically is providing you the services that you used to have on premises. You used to have this Exchange and Skype for Business and SharePoint for collaboration. A lot of these different digital services that you consume are packaged into multiple different offerings from small to large, depending on your needs. You can use one or the other or multiple different products, but it provides you the software as a service so that you don't have to run, own, and manage that technology, but instead consume it just like any other utility. You turn on the switch and the light bulbs go on. Somebody else has to worry about generation of electricity and getting it to your house. You just pay the monthly bill, of course, right? So the idea here is to give you the productivity suite, give you the products that you have used on premises a long time, freeing up the resources so that you can focus on your core priorities. So where do we start? And I'm sure Office 365 is not new to any of the attendees. So why don't we open the floodgates? Why don't we open the floodgates here and see what kind of questions our attendees want to lead with?
Yeah. So, maybe why don't we pop down to Portland? And Ken, do we have any tales from the trenches, say, within the last year on Office 365? And I know that you're home to the, forgive me, Ken, I forget the author's name, but he wrote the book on Office 365 migrations. I believe he's a member of your group.
Matt.
Any tales from the trenches? Oh, yeah, Matt, exactly.
Yeah, Matt Casson. Anybody in the room?
I haven't done any new ones lately. most clients I'm running into just aren't interested. They want on-prem software. They don't want a subscription model.
Yeah, that's been a challenge a number of us have had. But one of the challenges that we run into is being able to adequately filter incoming mail, and we use it actually for technology wizards, and we've got mail lists, and we try to limit the amount of stuff that comes in so we don't get spammed really bad, and we've seen that improve, but we've had some challenges with creating various rules. We've looked at the rules we create, and they just won't work. I've had Matt look at them. I had Walt here in the room look at it, and a couple other guys, and now, granted, we haven't tried those rules again in probably 6 or 7 months, but we've had some real challenges getting mail flow rules to work properly.
And,
yeah, Bhargav, you want to take that one because you're Mr. Exchange, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so are we talking on-premises or Office 365 when you had the challenges?
Office 365, we're sticking with that.
Okay. And so in Office 365, you have built-in protection from anti-spam, even scanning for the viruses making into your email, right? And those technologies with the introduction of advanced threat analytics and advanced threat protection has become even better. But there are multiple angles because security is never a single layer, right? But when you look at the filtering, are you looking at saying, if I am receiving email from this person, I want it to be processed in a different way? Or is it more like if it contains certain type of payloads, I want it to be blocked? What is the concern, I guess, is what I'm trying to assess before I go down the route of what Office 365 does to protect you from that.
So we've got a rule set up basically that just won't allow, it's a moderation rule. We're moderating any incoming email so that we don't get spammed by vendors. For the first couple of years that we used it, we had a considerable amount of stuff that we kept showing up. And we tried to create an additional moderation rule that would be an exception, essentially, so that the original moderation rule worked really well. We're able to filter out incoming emails so it only actually comes from our members' domains. But we needed to allow an exception to that rule for email that may come from an accountant, for our treasurer, or government, or whatever. And we had great difficulty getting that exception to actually work properly and go to that group. And we tried a couple other different things, but we banged our heads for quite a while on it and finally just gave up. And like I said, it's been months since we've tried.
Yeah, it's an interesting use case. If I'm hearing it correctly, you went down the restrictive model, making the email accessible from outside only to those who you have allowed, so that if the email is coming from them, it makes it to your mailboxes through the moderation. Otherwise, it doesn't. Is it applicable only to certain recipients, or is it for everyone in your org?
So as far as the incoming mail list stuff, we're only allowing mail to come in from the members' domains. And we have several mail lists or distribution groups. We have several on there that we've got set up. But we wanted to create an exception for anything sent to a specific address. And so that it would not be moderated, regardless of where it came from. And just could not find a way. The logic, when you read the words, the logic works perfectly. Makes absolute sense. My background is a developer, so, if then else I get very clearly. But it just wouldn't work. It just would not work, no matter what we did. We tried several iterations and different concepts and that sort of thing. We tried moving the priorities of the rules up and down, make differences. We tried a number of things, and none of them would work.
So
The
it always
rule that
got,
actually worked is the original one. Even if it was a lower priority, that's the only rule that actually worked.
it always got caught in the moderation, basically, right?
No, it just wouldn't work. we didn't even get a moderated version of it. It just wouldn't work.
No, when you say it wouldn't work, you mean it got delivered when it shouldn't, or it didn't get delivered when it should?
It didn't get delivered or moderated.
Okay, so it never
If I
made it.
remember correctly, it might have been moderated.
I think it was moderated, Ken. I don't remember it just disappearing into the ether. I think it just was moderated regardless of what we tried, and there was no mechanism that we could discern that would allow for that message to be acceptable based on the rule set we were trying to employ.
Yeah, that's Walt chiming in, by the way, and that's correct.
Yeah, if it completely went into ether, then I would really start worrying about what's happening underneath. But if it got moderated, it's the issue of prioritization from the moderation engine. And I don't think I can go into like details of how the moderation, what it does, but there is a very in-depth article that actually talks about the actual logic that the moderation follows, and I think it could have been. It's not necessarily you're doing the rule you created the wrong way, but it's probably the prioritization process that the engine takes is where it's getting hung up.
So Bhargav, that was one of the attempts that we made was to create a separate rule entirely and prioritize that rule over the second rule, and that didn't work.
Right. No, and that's where I think deeper troubleshooting is required, not something that we can do live here. But,
right, exactly.
But I'm
gentlemen. Hey, gentlemen, if you don't mind, two things. We're at 12:30, so I need to, as I made mention at the beginning, and some people have come on late, that we have the generous underwriting of our sponsors with Synnex and Fortinet. We're going to show a quick Synnex video. It's 12:30 Pacific. We're going to move on with the topic. I also have a lot of comments concerning the mail flow and so on. I have James Leach, Bob Farkas, the Donut Man out in New York, Alan Helb. Paul.
Hey there. I did not hear you say my name. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Well, I'll say it 3 times, so there. Hey, Paul. So you're from Synnex. For the audience that they don't know Paul, where are you located? What is your role? And I have a couple questions for you today.
Okay. Well, my name is Paul Mashlin. I am actually located in the Atlanta metro area. Most of the folks on my team are located in Greenville, South Carolina. And my title is a cloud sales and solution professional, and I focus on Azure.
On Azure, okay, perfect, because that's coming up in the next section. A question, I'll throw you an Azure question. I had a different question, but I'm gonna key in on your expertise, and I think you're gonna really enjoy the next section. How small a business can use Azure? It's a high-level conversation, but you'd be surprised how often it comes up in our small business server community, our small business space.
Well, I would say that for smaller companies, Azure Backup is a great place to take advantage of Azure. It really kind of depends on what you're trying to replicate in Azure. I would say size also depends upon what type of requirements or compliance does a customer need to meet. So, we have partners that are selling to 5-user companies and on up.
Okay, great. And then briefly, and we'll get back to the lecture, but in your role with Azure, what kind of offers and incentives do you have with respect to Azure specifically?
Well, for Azure CSP in the United States, we offer a standard discount of 12%. And so if you've been in the Azure pricing calculator, that tends to give you a MSRP estimate. Your cost through Cenex Azure CSP would be a 12% discount from that. On top of that, there are a ton of discounts and promotions and things you can take advantage of that are direct from Microsoft, like the Azure Everywhere program. Some of the larger opportunities that we do see happening in the SMB space, over $50,000 a year in consumption. There are actually some proof of concept funds from Microsoft, up to 10%. Okay. So now's a great time to get into Azure because of those things that are out there.
Absolutely. And it's, my friend, it's an ongoing, we're just starting that conversation, not ending it. Paul, you have a fan out there in Dwayne Miller who has commented that Paul is awesome. So, you know, it's happy Valentine's Day, my friend. Jenny, if you could bring the poll up. Paul, thank you for the chit chat and being a community sponsor. Please stay on if your schedule allows. And you're even welcome to kind of help pitch in some of the dialogue. We have thank you. We have a poll question. Do you currently have a Microsoft Cloud practice? While you're answering that, again, just a little bit of housekeeping, use the questions feature to ask your questions. Today is an unconference format. My job is to keep it focused. There's a lot of statements up on my screen that I'm going to try to get to, especially after 1 p.m. Dwayne and, I'm sorry, in particular, James Leach. So bear with me. And then next week is the 6th installment with Frank Olhurst, well-published author on Azure and SMB. Jenny, go ahead and take down the poll. And Bhargav, let's bring you back in, sir, if you don't mind taking over presenter. One more question on Office 365, and then maybe, if you don't mind, we'll move on over to Azure. And then after 1 p.m., we can kind of open it up to 1 p.m. Pacific, open it up to everything. But on Office 365, and maybe Portland will want to pitch in, maybe Cynics will want to pitch in, but it's a statement and it's a question, is that I feel you saw significant migration momentum in 365, anywhere from six years ago up until I'll offer the beginning of the year. I mean, it was, you have your Skykick, you have your BitTitan, you have some other vendors, and they were top of mind in a conversation. Now, understanding migrations are a one-time discrete event, and understanding those ISVs are changing their business models to remain relevant. Ken, let me throw it out to Portland, is that are you guys still doing migration work, or have you migrated everybody that so desires to go to 365 and that has reached a natural maturity?
I'm doing them episodically, probably one every 2 months.
That's Michael.
And I use BitTitan.
Yeah, fair enough.
We do about one a month doing Skykick.
Okay.
Yeah, we're sort of similar. We use Skykick and are doing them, we're probably doing 10 or 12 a year to that end, not necessarily once a month, but, and that's through Exchange. That's hosted Exchange that we're talking about here. There are other opportunities that we would like to explore that probably relates to the shared file system up in Azure. So I'm looking forward to the next piece of this conversation.
All right.
And I think to add to that, Microsoft also provides their own fast track services. If you have 50 or more seats, I believe is the minimum eligibility criteria. The fast track services provide some migration assistance, planning, and actual data move to Office 365 as well. Now, I think I hear in the partner community all the time that they prefer using these tools you mentioned.
Sure.
So what's the view on fast track? Have you guys been using it, not using it? Is it eligibility issue? Is it awareness? or is it just limitation of what the service can and cannot do? And I understand Microsoft doesn't want to be what all the partner solutions offer. It just wants to provide the fastest possible migration in the simplistic scenarios.
Yeah, Portland. Yeah, if I can call out to Portland, this is a great format. Portland, Fast Track, friend or foe, using it.
I've not used it. I've just heard of it recently. I would like to know something more about it in terms of what the services actually look like, because I don't know.
Fasttrack.microsoft.com.
We got some more feedback here.
Does the Fast
Absolutely.
Track provide any profile setup on the end user side yet?
I don't believe so. It's only the backend service of migration.
So that's one of our key pieces and one of the most potentially time-consuming parts of the migration is that new potential profile setup and making sure that it connects up with 365. So that's why we've used third-party tools to have more of a hands-off migration, a little bit more streamlined.
Right.
Just
Cool.
another.
One more comment, and we're going to move on to Azure. Ken, go ahead.
Just a quick question in the room here. With the limitation of 50 or more seats, does that provide a challenge with most of your customers?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. A lot of head nods. So, most of us work with businesses that are smaller of size for the most part. There's a few of us that have larger clients, but the overwhelming majority, I think, is smaller than 50.
Right. No, and that makes sense too. And I just really wanted to have a pulse on what's the one, awareness, and two, friend or foe kind of discussion to understand where it stands. So no, that's a good feedback. Thank you.
Cool. Well, Bhargav, let's jump into the good stuff. Let's talk Azure.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Microsoft Azure, it's one of those words where you ask, what is it? And that's why I have it listed on the slide as: is it infrastructure as a service? Is it platform as a service? Is it software as a service? And the answer to that question really is it's all of it, right? Azure offers you a whole lot of different services: AI, machine learning, Internet of Things, virtual machines and virtual networks, of course, container services, Linux and SQL. You also got SAP, and then Microsoft's own Dynamics and other offerings. So there is a lot that is on offer when you think, what is Microsoft Azure, right? It's not just one or the other. It's a lot of these different things that are being offered. So then the question from my perspective is, what are you guys using Azure for? What are the most common use cases? Where do you see the most impact where customers saying, I want to use Azure? What do you want to use it for?
So we'll put that out. We'll put that out to both Portland and the audience at large. To the audience at large, I'm actively on screen 2 on the questions screen, so I can read your feedback in terms of Azure instances. Let's go back to Portland. And Ken, I'll phrase the question this way: Are you guys using Azure, if at all? Because it's a legitimate issue in the S of SMB today.
Azure Active Directory is handy for syncing up the user accounts and Office 365 email. That's definitely one area. There's other areas that obviously the whole cloud, but I think that's the nicest thing about it. Something I would love to see would be true Active Directory sync in the cloud, as opposed to simply having to have an on-prem server with Azure Active Directory in the cloud as well. It'd be nice to have that as a service.
True hosted AD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That exists, but they're only offering it to enterprise right now.
Yeah, and I think I don't have answer to what Microsoft's plans are in terms of where this service is going to go, whether it's going to be the full AD or not. But if you think about what the direction it has taken so far, is it's the identity center point when it comes to all the services that Microsoft has to offer. Now that also includes third-party services, right? You have Box or you have Dropbox, and you want to control the flow of information that's confidential, you can set it up so that it has to be your company ID that you use to log in. And if you have Azure AD and if you're using Office 365, you already have the identity piece covered. Now you can federate that, use the same identity, same password to allow users to use your corporate subscription of Dropbox, for an example, and you can apply the policies around that. So that's one. The other is you have Intune, which allows you to do the device management, including Windows 10. So you have ability to, again, apply the policies. The paradigm shift here is going from the old model of using group policies to enforce the changes. And you know very well how difficult it is when the client device doesn't check in, when it is one of your sales folks who rarely comes into office, once in a while, things like that, where the modern framework of management is allowing you, regardless of where the user is, the compliance with the policies and the ability to enforce the settings. So maybe that's the answer. Again, I don't know, and I can't tell where the AD and Azure AD services are going to end up, what it's going to end up offering, but I'm just giving you the view of what's present. So hopefully that kind of helps.
Yeah, Bhargav, I have some online comments. So we have Guy Shepard saying and this is respect to Azure, we are using it more for infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. We have James Leach pitching again. James, thank you for being verbose today. By the way, Dwayne Miller, if you could retype your comment, I think I got it at mid-sentence. If you could modify your comment, Dwayne Miller. But James Leach comments with respect to usage, Azure Backup, File and SQL, Azure Site Recovery from DR, Disaster Recovery, Azure Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS, for miscellaneous workloads, Azure AAD for single sign-on and integration with various cloud apps, and some web apps and SQL instances for apps with DevOps. So, whoa, James, good Lord, man.
A lot of things, and that's good, right? I mean, you're leveraging what helps you speed up your cycles, whether it's development cycles, whether it's deployment and management processes, if you can benefit from it. And again, you have to balance out the equation of how much does it cost me, and what is my spend, what is my budget, what are my processes, am I willing to switch to the utility model? Some questions are hard finance questions, some questions are more software culture questions from the org perspective. But
yep,
once you start utilizing these technologies, of course it helps you speed up your processes, whether it provides you with efficiency. Of course, when you're using virtual machines for development, now you could use the dev framework, even the container services, if you're using that to speed up your whole DevOps processes and cycles.
Okay, boy, they're rolling in, man. Forgive me, Bhargav. I'm gonna. So Dwayne Miller clarified his question about a client that there's a domain service that was released about 6 weeks ago, and they have the full hosted AD. Thank you, Dwayne. Rusty Brown out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, probably taking a break from skiing, says we use AD Connect sites with 50 plus users and Azure AD per Microsoft Office 365B plan and Office 365 Azure AD basically. He goes on to say basically lightly, but so AD integration with 365, and then James Leach just has a comment here about the ability to scale up and down, turn things off and on, and so on. I want to key in, and folks, I'll get to the other comments. They are rolling in, but I want to key in on the financial sense. So part of the Ask the Expert explanation of today were a couple of questions. One was, when does Office 365 and Azure make sense? And I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the Azure team out, and you're not going to believe this. It's Building One, Building One out in Microsoft Redmond. Is the 365 team and the Azure team. I think 365 is based in that building, but we were just talking at a high level one fine afternoon about the economics of Azure in SMB. And I offered, it might be a little bit like an act of Congress. And here's what I mean is that we might have to have like a repatriation act about the way Apple can bring back its offshore earnings and get sort of a one-time tax break to do it. And that was kind of the contribution I made to that meeting, is that right now, down in the SMB space, and Bhargav, forgive us, but that's kind of our world, of course, being SMB Nation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But right now it's tough economics, and so I kind of kicked over to offers and incentives with the product managers, and one of those product managers was on the original SBS team in 1999, and some of you guys may remember Erin Dumphy Bork from 99 through about 2003. So she's still alive and kicking out there. That's kind of the economics. Is it's tough, and I'm gonna lobby, guys. I'm gonna lobby out there for some offers and incentives to bring everybody home. But Bhargav, once you get up to midsize and enterprise, I mean, I get it. Right. I mean, I've been in startups that use Azure. I get it.
Yeah.
It makes sense when it makes sense, as it were.
Right.
So let me look at a couple of other comments. We're reasonably caught up on the online comments. So let's continue the conversation in particular about virtualization. One way I view the virtualization part of Azure is that the basic test is, how much of my IT application base is virtual machine role compatible? And the answer, is going to be indicative of whether you can justify the migration to Azure. Bhargav, let's talk about virtualization, virtual machines in Azure. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so when I look at virtual services, right, the virtual machines and services, the biggest question that I always come up against is, what do I want to use it for? How much does it cost me? And if I was to put it on-prem or in some colo and just have a few of the servers, whether leased or bought, what's the cost differential? And that's one of the biggest decision makers questions that answers where they're gonna go. And for the small businesses, it is very difficult conversation to have. In terms of just specific virtual machines, it's difficult to justify the cost. A lot of times you look at the large machines and look at the physical servers and say, well, for paying that cost, I could just own the machine outright and run it in colo for 3 years, right? But the conversation shifts more in the favor of Azure when you start looking at the actual services and usage, because when you look at machine, you cannot compare. You might have a large server that you bought and you have it used for certain things, that may not be the right use of the server itself. It may not be using 100% of the resources that are out there. And the utility model, just like electricity, is you pay for what you use. So when you deploy a virtual machine, unless you use 100% of the capacity or 80% of the capacity, 90% of the capacity, it's difficult to justify the use of it, right? Just give you a very simple example of if I was a personal or small business, and if I want to run my blog, I'm running it on Azure because I have the Azure credits that I can use. But I wouldn't run a virtual machine otherwise in Azure just for my blog. It doesn't make sense, right? I'm not going to use the 2 vCPUs and 8 gigs of RAM to its fullest. Now, if I was to deploy the services instead and use maybe a container service and deploy a container, the conversation will change because the cost is different, the deployment process is different, and same goes for platform as a service, where you have a code and you want to deploy that. The cost is very different because you are not creating a full virtual machine, even though that's what is happening behind the scenes. Microsoft manages where your code runs. It guarantees that it is safe and secure. It's running in isolation. It's not, gonna have the memory sharing with the other code that can read, and there are leaks of your data. And then with that consolidation, of course, the cost dynamic shifts into favor of what you can do in Azure. So again, you have to really take a really deep look at what the actual purpose of evaluating the services. Just machine to machine, unless you're going to use the capacity, then the services shift to the scaling and stuff that we read in the comments, where you have ability to automatically scale. If your website is not hitting hard, but when you have the seasonal demand, if you have the servers on-prem, will you be able to scale so quickly to meet that demand? Will you know when that demand is going to hit your servers? Or would you have one of those high-profile incidents when MoviePass couldn't keep up with the demand when they announced they're going to go $9.99 for subscription instead of $35 they were charging? They have 2 million subscribers now, but their servers crashed. They couldn't keep up, right?
Yep.
That's where these auto scaling and other newer technologies come into play and help.
May we all have such problems of growth. Yeah, go ahead. Is that Paul?
This is Paul. One thing that I would say too that I see a lot of people not necessarily taking advantage of when it comes to virtual machines in Azure is you can either use Azure and run automation scripts. If you don't need these virtual machines running 24/7, don't pay for them to run 24/7. There's also some third-party tools out there that have very nice dashboards with little sliders on it that make it very easy to start up and shut down virtual machines at certain times. And so while PaaS is a great way to reduce costs in Azure, the platform as a service, like with SQL Azure, if you do need more control and you need that IaaS instance, don't think that unless the customer needs it, you don't have to run those virtual machines 24/7.
Yep. And Bhargav, I have just my friend on your screen. We have looks like an email appointment. We've all been there. It's top of the hour. So
do I have a wrong screen showing up?
Well, we don't want you to be late for your appointment, but we've all been there. Hey, it's 1:00. We're going to hear from our friend, a partner at Fortinet. Again, folks, we have the generous sponsorship of Fortinet, your own firm, Cascade Defense, with a partner or two. Tell us that part of your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So my partner and I met several years ago at a co-location and cloud provider. And so we're very familiar with the topic at hand today. And so security was a small part of their offering that ultimately they decided to no longer offer. So we took that part of the business, went out on our own and decided to focus on that completely. So it's been a great ride so far.
Well, you're a wise man because I'll tell you, there's nothing like investing in an expanding economic sector. It's swimming upstream when you're in a declining sector. And I want to give you a quick example. A lot of the listeners know I grew up in Alaska, and Alaska was expanding for 3 decades with Prudhoe Bay and the oil.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Prudhoe Bay has peaked, and then oil prices collapsed. And boy howdy, that's a double whammy. And I think the only institutions doing well up there, it's getting a little better, but I'll make a joke of it. But the bars, the bars are doing fine because there was a little bit of emotional distress. Hey, one last comment. Maybe if you could tell us either tales from the trenches with one of your unnamed clients, or tell us a little bit about the verticals you serve where Fortinet fits. I'll take either one.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, we kind of hit all different types of verticals, different sizes of business. We have management of firewalls from customers with a single firewall all the way up to several hundred, depending on their needs. And really, kind of to tie back into the presentation today, most often recently, we are seeing a number of migrations into Azure. So we've been doing some migrations and deployments of FortiGates in Azure. So that's definitely a growing space that we've seen lately, and a good way to take advantage of those resources.
Yeah, I did not expect that answer. So thanks for the contribution. And Eric, I want to invite you to not only stay but stay online with us if your schedule so allows. Please speak up if you have some comments or questions. The same with Paul over at Synnex. We have a poll up on the screen. So folks, quickly, do you offer security services and products as a significant part of your business? Yes, no. While you're answering that, we have 30 minutes left. So I have promised to get to all the comments on the online section. We still have the group in Portland, Oregon, online live with us. We have a couple of guests with us. So pretty quickly, we're going to turn this into an open forum once we check off on just maybe one or two other Azure issues. Think of it as free consulting, okay, that Bhargav is an expert in the field, well-published, well-experienced, has worked for both Microsoft and private sector companies. And so, Bhargav, I'm going to have to buy you a cup of coffee or a steak dinner when I see you because we're getting you for free, man.
No problem. So, hey, happy to engage. I run a user group here myself, and I started it almost 10 years ago when I was at Microsoft. So,
and by the way, where are you located? That's actually a really good point because we have a dispersed audience today.
Yeah, I'm close to Philadelphia, Microsoft's Malvern MTC, if anyone's familiar with the area, but a little bit outside of Philadelphia. And East Coast, very nice weather. I can't complain about the cold.
There you go. Jenny, go ahead and close out the poll. Bhargav, if we can go back to your screen, my friend, and I'm going to get us going again with just a couple of comments. So I'm actually going to read from the bottom up. Michael Cabrel says, I love this. Stupid question. Can Azure become a way to centralize logins in a Windows network? Many of my clients are still peer-to-peer. It's actually a good question, Michael.
And to answer that question, definitely a really good question. If you're peer-to-peer, yes. Azure AD can act as your central point of authentication for your users, but I must draw this distinction that don't expect it to be the Active Directory that you have used that it is not your Active Directory in the sense that it is not the one that will have the GPOs. It will not have the traditional sense of Active Directory. What it is designed to be is the authentication mechanism. And if you layer other technologies on top of it, like Intune or EMS, it provides you ability to also make those endpoints manageable. Windows 10 has built-in ability to join the Azure AD, right? So if you have your identities in Azure and using Azure AD, you can use your Windows 10 machine the first time you start it up, whether you bought it from Best Buy or you have a corporate image, if so chosen, is that you can have the user just pick, this is my work machine, connect to Azure Active Directory, provide their username and password, and Windows 10 then joins Azure AD and tries to find out what other policies and procedures it should follow based on what you have layered on top of it. It also
Cool.
has the ability to manage your threat protection, antivirus and things like that. So you certainly have a whole plethora of management capabilities that you can add on top of it.
And that was a good question, Michael. David Anderson said, just more of a comment. Harry, please remind listeners that they can schedule turnoffs on their Azure service at night and on weekends to save money. Boy, that sounds like my recent experience at the Swedish hospital sleep clinic, where I'm supposed to, not turn off my devices at night by analogy. So thank you, David, for that comment. We go up to Guy Shepard. Guy says, our model was to compare expertise and machine costs, not just machine cost. I want to throw that out to Cynics. Paul, so Guy Shepard is saying our model is to compare expertise and machine cost, not just machine cost. I got you to perk up on economics later. What are you seeing out there in terms of the decision-making matrix where it's not just the economics?
I think where we see most partners being successful with Azure is they are selling a solution, not selling quote unquote Azure. And so that kind of, you kind of get away from that economic conversation. You want to hire me as the resource to do these services for you. Let me use the technology that I'm comfortable with using and I'm familiar with building things on. So I think that's a good approach. When people talk about, just to talk about the economic piece a little bit, when people want to get into the nitty-gritty of Azure billing, everybody's used to hearing the example that Azure is utility billing. Think of it like your power bill, right?
Yep.
But when you get your power bill each month, do you analyze it and wonder how much you ran your microwave or how much you ran your refrigerator? No, you just knew that you wanted warm food warm, you wanted cold food cold, and you needed those things to survive. And that's kind of the way partners that are selling themselves and their own services, not specifically Azure, are being successful.
Yeah, and I think I would like to add to that really quickly. This is that digital transformation discussion we had earlier. Is the question that I tend to lead with is not what technology you're trying to deploy today or what product you're trying to deploy today. Instead, I have a question for my customers. What problem are you trying to address? And then let's figure out what is the best way to address that problem. Right. So when you focus on business and business problems, you're driving to something that your business needs. And when you need that, you're not going to analyze your microwaves and refrigerators. Now, of course, if the bill is runaway bill, you're going to see how many guests you had. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this much of a bill, right? But no, I think it's important to draw that everyone's attention to that point, that if you're leading with IT and deploying something because you want to upgrade to the latest and greatest, it's a difficult discussion to have. If you're leading with the business discussion of I'm trying to address this problem, and that's where this particular piece of Azure services or Office 365 will help you, that's much easier to discuss because you're addressing the actual real problem that the business is going to benefit from.
Well, and I'll take one more. I'm going to call out one more thought on this. Then we're going to go back to Ken in Portland, who has a question. Ken, stand by. But Eric over at Cascade Defense in the Spokane area. Let's talk about. Let's pick up on my comment about an expanding economic sector, right? So security is hot, and people will pay for security. My question to you is in the context of what Bhargav just said about, essentially avoiding a race to the bottom. Where do you guys fit into that? Fortinet is not necessarily, and I mean this respectfully, it's not the cheapest solution, and that's okay. I get the cheapest solution at the dollar store, and the dollar store things don't last very long.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's some inherent security built into cloud environments today, but, really layering on some additional functionality is really beneficial to a lot of customers. The thing that Fortinet kind of includes in all of their bundles is all of the services, all inclusive. So, if we need antivirus or web filtering or IPS or DOS protection, really being able to layer that in to those cloud environments is really helpful.
Yep. Ken from Portland, for folks that came on late, we have the Portland Technology Wizards live. Ken, you had a question. Please ask it.
So, Bhargav, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you have any idea when the full AD capabilities will be available via Azure?
I don't know if it will be, and if it will be, I don't know when it will be. Like I was saying earlier, we really have to look at what direction Microsoft's going in today, and it seems it's more about the modern ways of addressing the same challenges. So again, if that means GPO will not be in Azure AD like it is not today, maybe that's the path they will take. Again, I have no idea what path they will take. So, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But what I'm saying is, when we look at the problem and the way to address that problem, when you look at GPO is a way of addressing the compliance and settings configuration kind of management of your devices. And for that, Microsoft offers Intune, EMS, ways to manage your mobile and your Windows devices. So I don't know, would that be the answer, or would Microsoft say, well, that's one way of doing it, but we are also going to give you all of this other functionality that you have loved in the on-premises product forever? I just don't know what's on the plate.
Yep. I want to make a comment, and folks, first of all, a reminder for the online audience, please use the questions feature to type out your questions or your observations. That's worked really well today. I'm holding a couple back to read a little bit later. An interest of going back to your original point where we launched about an hour and 15 minutes ago about digital transformation. This is an interesting comment. Or an interesting flyby over on literally screen number 4 for me in the command center here. The markets just closed. MarketWatch sent out a bulletin that said Amazon passes Microsoft to become the 3rd largest company by market cap. Now, of course, that can change every day. And of course, Amazon is in some different lines of work. But they would hit Azure head on with AWS. And not that we're going to go there today. Bhargav, maybe we'll have you back spring quarter. That's a whole nother lecture.
That's a whole other discussion for sure.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion. But I just wanted to, in my chippy way, make a shout out to that MarketWatch report that the times are changing, my friend. Bhargav, what it really feels like to myself and other listeners on the line is it feels a lot like NetWare versus NT, right? That we have a good old fashioned battle developing, and hang on fast. With that said, other questions, please, folks. This is an unconference format. Portland, you're welcome to turn on the mic if you have questions. Eric out in Spokane, my friend, if you have questions or comments, and the rest of you, please use the question feature. It's an unconference format. Bhargav, do you have other talking points you'd like to share while we marshal up some questions about Azure?
So I think I would go a level up, as you mentioned about Azure, right? We never talked about site recovery, but it's not just site recovery, but other services as well. The site recovery, for an example, is changing the paradigm of how businesses achieved resiliency. And how did you achieve resiliency? Traditionally, it was, I need a second data center, whether it's live or whether it's secondary. And I have been through so many drills in my past experiences with my customers or my employers that we had to literally cut out the segment of the network to do the testing to make sure that it would work when the real disaster hits. And we couldn't affect production. So the testing was done in vacuum. Well, that's not real testing, right? How do I make sure that my actual clients who are going to be using these applications in production are able to use it from my secondary data center, from those secondary set of application servers and databases and whatnot? How would I know that all of that is working in unison at the same time? I didn't have a good way of doing it. Layer on top of that, our audience, the prime audience of the small businesses, they don't have resources to pay for that secondary data center and all those resources. They're just ticking away, standby, but you have to pay for. Now, site recovery allows you to change that discussion around. You can have the backup of your physical or virtual machines into site recovery, configured with the rules, where you can on demand spin it up to perform your recovery tests and without affecting production. And then, of course, you only pay for storage instead of paying for the virtual machines that are going to run that until you actually spin it up. So when you are doing your backups or the replication, you're only paying for storage. You only really pay for what you use. And then when the time comes, if there is an issue at the primary data center, if there is a disaster, whatever it is that requires you to activate your secondary site, your recovery location, that Azure becomes your recovery location. You spin it up, you start using it, your business is as usual. The amount of time it takes from the technical standpoint is matter of minutes or maybe hours at the most, compared to days if it was at second physical site.
Yep. I have a question. A question has come in. I actually like this one. What are the differences between SQL Azure and SQL Server? Because one of my MCSE tracks was SQL Server in the late 90s, so it's near and dear to my heart.
So if you're running a SQL Server in Azure, what you're saying is that you are installing SQL Server on a VM in Azure. You're managing that end-to-end. You're responsible for configuring it. You're responsible for managing the backend database engine. Whereas SQL Service from Azure is where you're spinning up a database that you need by defining the requirements, whether it's the IO requirements, whether it's the space requirements, whatnot. And once you define that, Microsoft takes care of the rest, similar to the code example we were talking about earlier, where you write the code, but once you spin up the platform as a service offering where you're running a web app, you're deploying your code and Microsoft then spins up the required resources in the backend. You are not responsible for managing that. You're not responsible for paying for that platform, except of course for the offering itself, for the web app, whatever the cost of the resources you need is, if that makes sense.
Well, maybe. Do you still have direct access to SQL? I'm asking a dumb question, I think, but forgive me. But do I still have direct access? Like I can do my stored procedures, I can do this, I can do that.
Yeah, so you definitely, that's a good question. And so when you think of virtual machine, for an example, you have access to your own machine, but you don't have access to the underlying hardware that is running the virtualization. And if that makes sense, what you can do is you can make any changes within your SQL database. So that means, you know, if you're running the queries against it, if you're running the stored procedures against it, that would work. It is just another SQL database for that matter. What you don't have access to is ability to change the core parameters of the SQL server itself. You might be used to logging into the SQL, what is that tool? The SQL admin tool that you can log into and create new databases and change the parameters on the temp database and assign permissions, full permissions to all the databases. You cannot do that because you're not managing that underlying SQL server. What you're managing is your own database. So think of it as an application that somebody needed and you created a database for and you gave them access to. That person is you, and you have access to that database. You can do anything within that database, if that makes sense. You can create the data structures, you can create your procedures, you can query the tables, and you can query your data. You can destroy whatever's inside your database all you want, but you can't do anything outside of that context.
Two final comments on SQL, then we do have some online comments, and always welcome to hear from Portland. But before we do that, and we have about 5 minutes left. So Paul from Synix sent me a link, and I have just pushed it out on chat. If you want to go to your GoToWebinar chat feature, and there's a link on the database conversation. Thank you very much, Paul. And then I want to give the audience a little context, and hit me up offline if you want more information. But I have just started. Microsoft has an amazing, for me, it's going to take 2 years, but they called it a degree. They've now changed it to professional certification. And I'm doing the big data certification. And Bhargav, maybe you're familiar with this program. Basically, every class is 12 to 30 hours. I'm going to do one a quarter, which is why it's going to take 2 years, but it's akin to a master's degree curriculum. I'm doing big data, which is SQL heavy, database heavy, which I can do. Carl Palachuk, a well-known author in our space, is doing data science. God bless him. I mean, if you think I'm going to take on R or Python, it ain't going to happen in this lifetime, my friend. Okay, now back to the online, and folks, hit me up offline. It's free. This is a graduate level earned certification that's free from Microsoft. Hit me up offline if you want to join me. We have Craig Franklin commenting, we have researched Azure Site Recovery recently and found the following 3 concerns. Number 1, it's not clear that it can coexist with on-prem Hyper-V replica. Number 2, no offline seating available, in parentheses, via Azure File Import Export Service, IMPRIN. And then number 3, failback to on-prem servers is slow or problematic. Thank you, Craig. Bhargav, would you like to take that? There were 3 points about Azure Site Recovery.
Yep, and can you read me the first one again?
Yeah, number 1, fair enough. Number 1, not clear that it can coexist with on-prem Hyper-V replica.
Right. So here you have 2 replications. You have the replication going to your second Hyper-V set of servers, and the plan there is to fail over to that replica. And then if you're setting up the Azure, I don't know if there are inbuilt limitations that stops it from happening. But it's really a question of what's the end goal there, to have your maybe second data center as your secondary and then Azure as a tertiary. Again, I don't have a definitive answer to that, whether it can coexist or not. But I think the replication engine is same as the Hyper-V replica.
Number 2, Craig Franklin asked, no offline seating available via Azure Import-Export service. No offline seating. You want to take that one?
Yes, yeah, and so that one, I have seen the large files and the large file share transfers using the disk shipment services, where you have your own keys and encrypted disks you're sending to Azure, and then it's being imported into your storage account. I think this question is building on that, saying, why can't I then ship my large VMs and then have them be imported? And that I don't have answer to why it's something that's not offered, and unfortunately I don't know what the roadmap for that is, whether Microsoft's planning to offer that as an add-on to what doesn't exist today. But I hear you. It would be great if I have a really large machine that I can import by shipping a disk off to Microsoft and them importing it. Even if I have to sync the Delta after that, it would be cool if I'm able to at least take care of the base that is large amount of data.
Final observation from Craig Franklin, then we're gonna make one last call out to Portland. So Portland, queue up any last questions. We're almost at time. Craig Franklin goes on to say, fallback to on-prem servers is slow or problematic. So fallback.
Yeah, and I can't tell you why, but that is, your mileages may vary. But there are so many moving pieces into when you include, and this is not just limited to the replicas and virtual machines on the site recovery, right? There are connectivity components, there are compression, there is inspection, there are security components in your network path, and on top of that, the bandwidth requirements itself, that all add up to the requirements of what needs to be done when you fail back to on-prem. And when taking all of those steps, consider the latency, consider the communications between the components and so on. Do they flow as efficiently as they need to? Are the two things that are very hard to address in general, right? So this is similar to, my Toyota claiming to give me 43 on highway for a large Avalon, and I don't get that. I get 36, 37 at times, and I'm disappointed. But I have to understand, the 43 is ideal conditions.
Good analogy, and a good one. We have women and children on the line, so it's good to see good, wholesome analogies, my friend. We like to have a little fun here, but hey, I'm going to have Portland take us out, and then we're also going to be taken out by the 40net football video. For those of you that have a few extra minutes to watch that, Jenny's going to cue that up. Bhargav, first of all, before we hear from Portland, folks, Bhargav's publications are on the screen, as well as you can search on his name and go to his LinkedIn profile and his webpage for other publications. So,
if I can add to that, definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're trying to contact me, you can contact me right through my blog or through the Twitter, or even connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a conversation. Feel free to reach
Perfect.
out.
And what I'll do, we send out a thank you note tomorrow. So, Jenny, if you want to make a note, I'm making a note myself, but we're going to get your LinkedIn profile URL so people can link up with you and so on. So shout out to Portland, Oregon. If you joined late, we have the Portland Technology Wizards live with their monthly meeting, attending, and I would offer participating Ken, any final questions, my friend down there?
Anybody in the room?
No.
I don't think anybody's got any questions, but if there's anybody that's in the Northwest Oregon or Southwest Washington area that's looking for a great group to belong to, definitely contact us. You can find us at technologywizards.com.
Okay, I'll repeat that, technologywizards.com. In fact, I'm going to put that in the chat feature. Jenny, let's roll that video is a way to take us out. And Bhargav, thank you so much, my friend. We'll
Thanks everyone for joining this week's webinar, and have a fantastic week. We'll see you back next week for the next MSP Tech Talk. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.